Greece, a land of myths, warriors, philosophers, and revolutionaries. From the cradle of Western civilization to the modern era, Greek history is a saga of power, conquest, art, and resilience. This is the story of how a small collection of city-states transformed into one of the most influential civilizations in human history. More than 5,000 years ago, ancient seafarers settled in the Aegean, laying the foundations for what would become one of the most enduring cultures the world has ever seen. From the legendary Minoans and Mycenaeans to the rise of Athens and Sparta, Greece gave birth to democracy, philosophy, theater, and Olympic Games, concepts that still shape our world today. But Greek civilization was not just about philosophy and art. It was forged in war and conquest, from the Persian Wars to the brutal Peloponnesian War, from the rise of Alexander the Great, who built an empire stretching from Greece to India, to the era of Roman dominance. Even under foreign rule, Greece remained a beacon of knowledge, influencing the Byzantine Empire and later resisting centuries of Ottoman rule before finally achieving independence in the 19th century. This documentary will take you on a journey from the ancient past to the present day, exploring the triumphs and struggles of Greek civilization. You will witness the rise and fall of empires, the clash of armies, the birth of great ideas, and the indomitable spirit of the Greek people, who, despite countless challenges, have left an everlasting mark on history. Join us as we unveil the entire history of Greek civilization, from ancient to modern. Long before the towering columns of the Parthenon stood under the Athenian sky, before the great philosophers questioned the nature of existence, and before the Spartans marched to war with unbreakable discipline, there was a time when Greece was little more than a scattered collection of small villages and wandering tribes. It was an age shrouded in myth, where gods and mortals walked the earth together, where legends of heroes and monsters shaped the beliefs of the people. But behind the myths, a real civilization was beginning to take form, one that would lay the foundation for one of the greatest cultures in human history. To understand the birth of Greek civilization, one must first look at the world that came before it. Thousands of years before the rise of Athens or Sparta, the Mediterranean was already home to great civilizations. The Egyptians had built their pyramids, the Mesopotamians had raised their ziggurats, and the Hittites had waged wars across Anatolia. Greece, by contrast, was still in its infancy, its lands occupied by scattered tribes of farmers, herders, and warriors. But the seeds of civilization had already been planted. The earliest known Greek societies began to emerge on the island of Crete, where a mysterious people, the Minoans, built a civilization that flourished between 300 and 1400 BCE. The Minoans, named after the legendary King Minos, were unlike anything Greece had ever seen. They constructed vast palaces, the greatest of which was at Knossos, a labyrinthine structure filled with elaborate frescoes, indoor plumbing, and evidence of a highly advanced society. The Minoans were master seafarers, their ships dominating the Mediterranean trade routes. They exchanged goods with Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Anatolia, bringing back exotic goods and new ideas. But despite their power and influence, their civilization came to a mysterious and sudden end. Some believe it was a massive volcanic eruption on the nearby island of Thera, triggering tsunamis and chaos. Others suggest that invaders, perhaps the early Greeks themselves, brought about their downfall. Whatever the cause, the Minoans disappeared, leaving behind ruins and myths of a lost world. As the Minoans faded, a new power rose on the Greek mainland, the Mycenaeans. Unlike their predecessors, the Mycenaeans were a warrior society, their cities fortified with massive walls and their kings buried in elaborate tombs filled with gold and weapons. They thrived between 1600 and 1100 BCE, and their influence spread across the Aegean. The Mycenaeans were the first true Greeks. They spoke an early form of the Greek language, worshipped gods who would later be central to Greek mythology, and built a culture that would shape the Greece to come. Cities like Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos became centers of power, ruled by kings who claimed descent from divine heroes. It was during this time that some of the most famous myths of Greek history were born. The epic tales of the Iliad and the Odyssey, attributed to the poet Homer, tell of the Mycenaean Greeks waging war against the city of Troy, of great heroes like Achilles, Hector, and Odysseus, and of gods who intervened in human affairs. While these stories were filled with exaggerations and fantasy, they were rooted in real events and real people. Archaeological discoveries at Troy and Mycenae suggest that some form of war may indeed have taken place, forever cementing the Mycenaeans as the first true warriors of Greek legend. But even the mighty Mycenaeans could not escape the cycle of rise and fall. Around 1100 BCE, their civilization collapsed. The reasons for this downfall remain debated, but scholars point to a combination of factors: internal strife, economic decline, climate change, and the arrival of mysterious invaders known as the Dorians. Cities were abandoned, trade declined, and literacy was lost. For the next several centuries, Greece fell into a period of darkness, an era where much of the knowledge and achievements of the Mycenaeans disappeared. This period, known as the Greek Dark Ages, saw Greece return to a more primitive way of life. The grand palaces of the Mycenaeans crumbled into ruins, and the people lived in small, isolated villages. Writing, once a key part of Mycenaean culture, vanished, and for nearly 400 years, there are few records of what happened in Greece. But despite the darkness, the Greek spirit endured. The oral tradition of storytelling kept history and myths alive. The stories of Troy, the adventures of Hercules, and the trials of the gods were passed down from generation to generation, forming the backbone of Greek identity. It was also during this time that iron replaced bronze, leading to advancements in weaponry and tools. Slowly, Greece was preparing for its rebirth. By the 8th century BCE, Greece began to emerge from the shadows. The city-state, or polis, became the new foundation of Greek society. Unlike the vast empires of Egypt and Persia, Greece did not unify under a single ruler. Instead, it was a land of independent city-states, each with its own government, culture, and identity. Athens, Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, these cities would become the heart of Greek civilization. Each polis was unique. Athens embraced democracy, where citizens could debate and vote on laws. Sparta, by contrast, built a society centered around military discipline and strength. But despite their differences, all Greek city-states shared a common language, religion, and heritage. They worshipped the same gods, celebrated the same festivals, and took pride in their Greek identity. It was during this time that the Greeks adopted a new writing system, borrowing from the Phoenicians to create the Greek alphabet. This breakthrough allowed them to record history, poetry, and laws, paving the way for the Golden Age of Greek literature. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey were written down, giving Greece its first great literary works and preserving the myths that had defined its past. With the rise of the polis, Greece was no longer a land of wandering tribes or fallen kingdoms. It was now a civilization ready to shape history. Trade flourished, colonies were founded across the Mediterranean, and new forms of government began to emerge. The Greeks had survived the Dark Ages, and now they stood on the brink of greatness. The early years of Greek civilization were filled with struggle, war, and uncertainty. From the lost grandeur of the Minoans to the warrior kings of Mycenae, from the fall into darkness to the rebirth of the polis, Greece had endured centuries of hardship. But with each challenge, the Greeks adapted, evolved, and grew stronger. This was only the beginning. The foundation had been laid for what would become one of the most remarkable civilizations in human history. The gods still watched over Greece, the heroes still lived in the minds of the people, and the city-states were preparing to rise to unprecedented heights. The world had yet to see the glory of Athens, the might of Sparta, or the wisdom of Greek philosophy. But all of that was coming. Greek civilization had awakened, and history was about to be rewritten. The Greece that emerged from the darkness of the early centuries was no longer a land of scattered villages and forgotten ruins. It had transformed into a collection of powerful and independent city-states, each with its own government, culture, and ambitions. At the heart of this transformation were two of the most famous cities in history, Sparta and Athens. One was a society built on discipline, war, and unbreakable order. The other was a beacon of philosophy, democracy, and art. Though they shared the same gods and language, these two city-states would follow vastly different paths, each shaping the destiny of Greece in its own way. By the 8th century BCE, the polis, or city-state, had become the dominant political unit in Greece. Unlike the sprawling empires of Egypt and Persia, Greece was not ruled by a single king. Instead, each city-state functioned as its own independent entity, with its own government, laws, military, and economy. The geography of Greece played a crucial role in this development. With its rugged mountains, deep valleys, and scattered islands, Greece was naturally divided into isolated regions. This prevented the formation of a centralized empire but encouraged the growth of fiercely independent cities. Trade, warfare, and alliances linked these city-states together, yet they often viewed each other as rivals rather than allies. At the heart of every polis was the agora, a central marketplace where citizens gathered not only to buy and sell goods, but to discuss politics, philosophy, and public affairs. Above many of these cities stood an acropolis, a fortified hill that housed temples and important buildings. Religion, commerce, and governance all revolved around these central spaces, reinforcing the unique identity of each city-state. Among the hundreds of Greek polis, two would rise above all others: Sparta and Athens. Sparta was unlike any other city in Greece. Located in the region of Laconia in the southern Peloponnese, it was a society built for war, discipline, and absolute order. The Spartans believed that strength and unity were the foundations of a powerful state, and everything in their society was designed to create the ultimate warrior. Sparta's government was an oligarchy, meaning that power was held by a small group of rulers. Two kings led the city, primarily overseeing military affairs, while a council of elders, known as the Gerousia, and an assembly of Spartan citizens made major decisions. However, real power rested in the hands of a group called the Ephors, 5 officials who enforced laws and ensured that the kings remained loyal to Spartan principles. But it was the Spartan way of life that truly set them apart. From birth, Spartan children were tested for strength and endurance. Weak or sickly babies were often abandoned, as only the strong were allowed to survive. At the age of 7, boys were taken from their families and placed in the agoge, the brutal Spartan training system. For years, they endured harsh conditions, physical punishment, and relentless drills. They were taught to fight, steal, and survive with minimal resources. Pain was not an excuse, and fear was not an option. By the time they reached adulthood, they were hardened warriors, ready to defend their city with their lives. Unlike other Greek cities, Sparta did not focus on trade, art, or philosophy. It had no grand temples or luxurious buildings. Everything was centered around military excellence. Even the Spartan women were known for their strength and independence. Unlike Athenian women, they were given physical training and encouraged to be strong so they could bear healthy warriors for the state. Sparta's entire existence was dedicated to war, and it was this discipline that made them one of the most feared military forces in history. While Sparta focused on war, Athens took a different path. Situated in central Greece, Athens was a city of culture, art, and innovation. It was here that democracy was born, and it was here that some of the greatest minds in history would emerge. Athens was originally ruled by kings, but by the 7th century BCE, power had shifted to an aristocratic elite. However, this system was deeply unfair, and tensions between the rich and poor threatened to tear the city apart. In the early 6th century BCE, a statesman named Solon introduced reforms to ease social conflict. He ended debt slavery, allowed more citizens to participate in government, and laid the foundation for a more inclusive political system. But it was Cleisthenes in 508 BCE who would truly revolutionize Athenian politics. He introduced the world's first democracy, giving all free Athenian men the right to vote and participate in decision-making. The assembly, where citizens gathered to debate and pass laws, became the heart of Athenian government. This radical idea of rule by the people would influence civilizations for centuries to come. Beyond politics, Athens became a hub of intellectual and artistic achievement. It was the birthplace of philosophy, with thinkers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle questioning the nature of existence and morality. The city flourished with playwrights, historians, and sculptors, creating works that would define Western culture. The Parthenon, built in honor of Athena, stood as a symbol of Athenian pride and devotion to wisdom. Unlike Sparta, Athens encouraged trade and economic expansion. Its navy became one of the strongest in Greece, allowing it to establish colonies and dominate the Aegean Sea. Wealth flowed into the city, funding magnificent temples, theaters, and public buildings. But despite its achievements, Athens was far from perfect. Women had little political power, slavery was common, and political corruption was always a threat. Yet, for all its flaws, Athens would lay the groundwork for democracy, philosophy, and artistic expression, shaping the course of history for centuries to come. Though both Sparta and Athens were powerful, their differences made them natural rivals. Sparta viewed Athens' democracy as weak and chaotic, while Athens saw Sparta's militaristic rule as oppressive and barbaric. At times, they fought side by side, such as during the Persian Wars, when both cities united against the invading Persian Empire. But their alliance was always fragile. Eventually, their rivalry would erupt into one of the most devastating conflicts in Greek history, the Peloponnesian War. For now, however, Greece stood at the height of its power. The city-states flourished, their influence stretching across the Mediterranean. Colonies were founded, trade expanded, and art and philosophy thrived. But beneath the surface, tensions were building. The Golden Age of Greece was approaching, but so too was the shadow of war. The stage was set for the next chapter in Greek history, where the fate of an entire civilization would be determined not by diplomacy or philosophy, but by the clash of swords and the ambitions of men. As dawn broke over the rocky hills of Greece, two powerful cities emerged, each walking a separate path toward dominance. To the east, Athens, a city of art, philosophy, and democracy, flourished under the minds of great thinkers. To the south, Sparta, a warrior society built on discipline and strength, trained its people for one purpose: war. These two city-states, so different in their ways of life, would come to define Greece, shaping its destiny for centuries to come. The story of Athens and Sparta is one of contrasts, one built on ideas, the other on might. Their rise was not an accident but a product of the unique environments in which they developed, the struggles they faced, and the values they upheld. As their influence spread across Greece, their rivalry would set the stage for an epic power struggle that would change the course of history. Long before Athens became the beacon of democracy, it was ruled by kings, much like other early Greek settlements. But as time passed, power shifted into the hands of a privileged few, the aristocrats, wealthy landowners who governed the city and controlled its laws. This oligarchy, however, brought misery to the common people. Farmers, drowning in debt, often lost their land and were forced into servitude. Anger simmered in the streets of Athens, and unrest grew. It was in these turbulent times that a leader named Solon emerged. Known for his wisdom, he understood that Athens stood on the brink of chaos. In an effort to balance power, he enacted sweeping reforms. He freed those who had been enslaved by debt, restructured the social classes, and gave common citizens a voice in government. His changes planted the first seeds of democracy, but Athens was still far from the thriving city it would become. For years, the struggle for control continued. Tyrants rose and fell, some ruling with fairness, others with an iron fist. But then came Cleisthenes, a man determined to put power in the hands of the people. In a radical move, he restructured Athens, breaking the influence of aristocratic families and creating a system where every free male citizen could participate in government. This was the birth of Athenian democracy, a system where the people, not kings or nobles, would decide their fate. The city flourished, its economy expanded, and its culture blossomed. Art, theater, and philosophy thrived. Athenian ships sailed the seas, bringing wealth and influence. But as Athens grew, so did its ambition, and not all of Greece welcomed its rise. While Athens embraced change and intellectual pursuit, Sparta walked a different path. Nestled in the rugged Peloponnesian landscape, Sparta built itself on one fundamental principle: strength. Unlike Athens, where citizens debated and crafted laws, Sparta forged warriors. Every aspect of Spartan life revolved around the military. Weakness was not tolerated. Comfort was seen as a flaw. The state demanded discipline, and every citizen was molded into a soldier. From birth, a Spartan's fate was decided. Newborns were examined by the elders, and if a child was deemed too weak, he was left to perish. Those who survived grew up under a harsh system designed to strip them of fear and forge them into warriors. At the age of 7, Spartan boys were taken from their families and sent to the Agoge, a brutal military training program. They learned to endure pain, hunger, and hardship. They were taught to steal to survive but were punished if caught. Not for the act of stealing, but for failing to do it skillfully. At 20, they became full-fledged soldiers, dedicating their lives to the state. A Spartan's duty was not to himself, nor to his family, but to Sparta. Unlike in Athens, where men could be scholars, artists, or merchants, in Sparta, there was only one role: warrior. And yet, while their men were molded for battle, Spartan women enjoyed a level of freedom unheard of in the ancient world. They were educated, physically trained, and encouraged to be strong, for they too served the state, raising future warriors and managing affairs while their husbands fought. Sparta was not built on trade or culture. It was built on conquest. Early in its history, it had seized the fertile lands of Messenia and enslaved its people, known as the Helots. These Helots worked the fields and provided food, allowing the Spartans to focus entirely on military training. But there was a cost. The Helots outnumbered their Spartan masters by a vast margin, and fear of rebellion shaped Spartan society into a fortress, ever vigilant, ever ready for war. For years, Athens and Sparta coexisted, each growing in power, each shaping Greek civilization in its own way. Athens became a hub of learning, where philosophers questioned the nature of existence and playwrights entertained crowds with stories of gods and heroes. Sparta remained isolated, uninterested in art or philosophy, concerned only with strength and survival. But their differences made conflict inevitable. Athens, now a democratic powerhouse, sought to expand its influence across Greece. It formed the Delian League, an alliance of city-states meant to defend against foreign threats. But as time passed, this league became less of a mutual alliance and more of an Athenian empire. The wealth of its allies flowed into Athens, building magnificent temples and a powerful navy. Other Greek cities, especially Sparta and its allies, began to see Athens as a threat. Sparta, ever suspicious of change, led its own alliance, the Peloponnesian League. It stood against Athenian expansion, believing that Athens' influence was corrupting the traditional ways of Greece. The two cities were on a collision course, and the balance of power was shifting toward war. Though Athens and Sparta had managed to work together against a common enemy, the mighty Persian Empire, their uneasy alliance would not last. The tension between them grew with every passing year. Sparta saw Athens as arrogant and imperialistic. Athens saw Sparta as a backward, oppressive state. The rivalry between these two powers was not just a conflict of armies but a clash of ideologies. Athens represented democracy, culture, and intellectual freedom. Sparta embodied discipline, order, and military might. Their destinies were intertwined, and soon, all of Greece would be caught in the storm of their struggle. What had begun as two city-states rising to greatness would soon spiral into a war that would decide the future of Greece itself. The Golden Age of Athens was at its peak, but shadows loomed on the horizon. Would Athens' democracy prove strong enough to withstand the challenges ahead? Or would Sparta's unwavering discipline crush the ambitions of its greatest rival? The fate of Greece was about to be tested in a war that would shake the foundations of the ancient world. In the next chapter, we step onto the battlefield as Greece faces its greatest external threat yet, the Persian invasion. The stage is set for one of the most legendary conflicts in history, where warriors, kings, and strategies will determine the fate of an entire civilization. The sun rose over the Aegean Sea, casting its golden light upon the scattered city-states of Greece. For years, they had bickered, argued, and fought amongst themselves, but now a far greater threat loomed on the horizon. To the east, beyond the waters of the Aegean, lay the vast and formidable Persian Empire, an empire of unimaginable wealth, an empire that stretched from the banks of the Indus River to the shores of the Mediterranean. It was a force unlike any the Greeks had ever encountered, and now it was coming for them. This was not just a war between armies. It was a war between civilizations, between East and West, between the boundless might of Persia and the fierce independence of Greece. The Greeks stood at the edge of annihilation, yet they would not bow. They would fight not for conquest but for survival. The Persian Empire, under the rule of King Darius I, was a juggernaut. With its vast network of roads, its well-trained armies, and its unmatched resources, it had swallowed entire nations with ease. The lands of Anatolia, Egypt, Mesopotamia all had fallen under Persian rule. But there was one region that refused to submit. The Greek cities of Ionia, on the western coast of modern-day Turkey, had long been under Persian control, yet they yearned for freedom. In 499 BCE, they revolted. The Ionian Revolt was a desperate bid for independence, and though it ultimately failed, it did something far more significant. It attracted the attention of the powerful city of Athens. Seeing their fellow Greeks struggle against the Persian yoke, Athens sent aid. It was a small act of defiance, but to Darius, it was an insult that could not go unanswered. If a minor city like Athens dared to interfere with Persian affairs, it would be made an example. The great king swore vengeance. In 490 BCE, the Persians arrived. A fleet of warships, carrying tens of thousands of soldiers, landed on the beaches of Marathon, a mere 26 miles from Athens. The Athenians, vastly outnumbered, had no choice but to fight. With no walls strong enough to keep the enemy out and no allies willing to send aid, they marched to meet the invaders head-on. What happened next would become legend. The Athenian army, though smaller, was composed of hardened hoplites, soldiers who fought in tight formations with bronze shields and spears. Led by Miltiades, they did the unthinkable. They charged at the Persian army, running across the battlefield in an act of sheer bravery. The Persians, unaccustomed to such an aggressive assault, faltered. The Greek phalanx crashed into their lines, and the battle turned into a slaughter. Within hours, the Persians were routed, fleeing back to their ships. Athens had won. The victory at Marathon was more than a battle won. It was a statement. Greece would not kneel. Darius, humiliated, planned his revenge, but fate intervened. Before he could return, he died, leaving the empire in the hands of his son, Xerxes. And unlike his father, Xerxes would not come with a single army. He would bring the full might of Persia. A decade later, in 480 BCE, the earth trembled beneath the march of the Persian army. Xerxes had assembled the greatest military force the world had ever seen, hundreds of thousands of warriors, drawn from every corner of his empire. His fleet covered the seas, his bridges spanned the waters of the Hellespont, and his ambition knew no limits. He was not coming to punish Athens alone. He was coming to conquer all of Greece. Faced with annihilation, the Greek city-states did something unprecedented. They united. Sparta, Athens, Corinth, and others put aside their rivalries, realizing that only together could they stand a chance. Themistocles, the cunning Athenian general, knew that Greece's best hope lay in the sea, but first, the land needed to be defended. And so, the Greeks chose their battlefield, the narrow mountain pass of Thermopylae. It was here that King Leonidas of Sparta and his 300 warriors made their legendary last stand. Alongside a few thousand allied Greeks, they held back the Persian tide for days, using the terrain to their advantage. Again and again the Persians charged, and again they were driven back. The Spartans, trained from birth for war, fought with a ferocity that stunned even Xerxes. But betrayal sealed their fate. A Greek traitor led the Persians through a hidden path, outflanking the defenders. Leonidas and his men knew they were doomed, yet they did not retreat. They fought to the last, choosing death over surrender. Their sacrifice became the stuff of legend, inspiring all of Greece to resist. But even as their bodies fell, the war was far from over. With Thermopylae lost, the Persian army marched south, burning Athens to the ground. The city lay in ruins, but its people had not given up. Themistocles had a plan, one final gamble that could turn the tide of war. He lured the Persian navy into the Straits of Salamis, a narrow waterway where their massive fleet could not maneuver properly. Here, the Greek triremes, swift and deadly, struck like wolves. The Persians, unable to deploy their full force, fell into chaos. Greek rams smashed into Persian ships, and within hours, the once mighty Persian fleet was in shambles. Xerxes, watching from a golden throne on the cliffs above, could do nothing. His invasion had failed. The gods, it seemed, favored the Greeks. With the Persian navy shattered, Xerxes withdrew, leaving behind a portion of his army to finish the job. But by now, the Greeks were emboldened. A year later, at the Battle of Plataea, the combined forces of Greece met the Persians in open battle. The Spartans, leading the charge, crushed the enemy, sending them into full retreat. Persia's grip on Greece was broken. The war was over. Against all odds, Greece had stood firm. The Persian Empire, though still mighty, would never again attempt to conquer the Greek world. The victory was not just military, it was ideological. The Greeks had proven that free men, fighting for their own land, could stand against the greatest empire on earth. The Persian Wars left an indelible mark on Greece. Athens, having played a crucial role in the victory, emerged as the dominant city-state. It led the formation of the Delian League, a coalition meant to protect against future threats. But power is a dangerous thing. What had begun as an alliance of equals soon turned into an Athenian empire. And as Athens' influence grew, so did tensions with Sparta. The unity that had saved Greece would not last. A new war, more devastating than any before, was on the horizon, the Peloponnesian War. Greece had repelled an external threat, but now it would turn on itself. Yet, for a brief moment in history, the Greeks had stood as one. They had defied an empire, rewritten the fate of their world, and set the foundation for the Golden Age to come. The gods had favored them, but their greatest challenges were still ahead. The dust of war had settled, and for the first time in decades, the Greek city-states were free from the shadow of Persian domination. The victory over the mighty Persian Empire was more than just a military triumph. It was a turning point in history, and at the heart of this transformation stood Athens, the city that had risen from the ashes of its destruction to become the most powerful and influential force in Greece. This was the beginning of an era unlike any before it, an era of philosophy, art, democracy, and innovation. This was the Golden Age of Athens. The Persian Wars had left Greece scarred but unbroken. Sparta, ever the warrior state, returned to its traditional ways, maintaining its rigid military culture. But Athens had different ambitions. It had played a decisive role in repelling the Persian invasion, and now, under the leadership of statesmen like Themistocles and later Pericles, it sought to build something greater, an empire not of conquest but of culture, knowledge, and influence. The Delian League, originally a coalition of city-states united against Persia, became the foundation of Athenian dominance. Athens, with its superior navy, assumed leadership, collecting tribute from its allies under the guise of mutual protection. But over time, what was meant to be an alliance became an Athenian empire in all but name. City-states that resisted found themselves at the mercy of Athens' powerful fleet. It was clear Athens was no longer just one city among many. It was the beating heart of the Greek world. At the center of this newfound power was an idea more revolutionary than any army or fleet democracy. Though its roots stretched back before the Persian Wars, it was in the Golden Age that Athenian democracy truly flourished. Unlike the monarchies of Persia or the oligarchies of Sparta, Athens embraced a system where power was given to the people, or at least to free Athenian men. The assembly, where citizens gathered to debate and vote on laws, became the lifeblood of the city. The Council of 500, chosen by lot, ensured that governance did not fall into the hands of a single elite class. Pericles, the man who would come to define this era, championed the idea that every citizen had a role to play in government, regardless of wealth or status. "We do not copy our neighbors," he once declared. "We are a model to them." It was a bold experiment, one that would lay the foundation for future democracies. But it was not without its flaws. Women, slaves, and foreigners had no voice in this system. And as Athens' power grew, so did resentment from other Greek city-states, who saw democracy as little more than a tool for Athenian dominance. Beyond politics, Athens became the epicenter of art, philosophy, and architecture. The city underwent a transformation, one that would leave an imprint on history forever. Temples rose, statues lined the streets, and great minds gathered to discuss the very nature of existence. At the heart of this transformation stood the Parthenon, a marvel of engineering and beauty. Built on the ruins of the old temple destroyed by the Persians, it was more than just a monument. It was a symbol of Athenian resilience and ambition. Dedicated to Athena, the city's patron goddess, it housed an enormous statue of her, crafted from gold and ivory. The Parthenon, with its perfect proportions and intricate carvings, became a testament to the Greek pursuit of beauty and balance. Art flourished like never before. Sculptors like Phidias and Myron created lifelike statues, capturing movement and emotion in marble and bronze. Theater became a central part of Athenian life, with playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides producing tragedies that explored the depths of human suffering and fate. Comedies, too, found their place, with Aristophanes satirizing politics, war, and even the gods themselves. Philosophy, perhaps the most lasting legacy of Athens, began to challenge traditional thought. Socrates, a man who questioned everything, roamed the streets, engaging citizens in debates about morality, justice, and knowledge. His method of questioning, later known as the Socratic method, would become the foundation of Western philosophy. Though he would eventually be condemned to death for corrupting the youth, his ideas would live on through his students, particularly Plato, who in turn taught Aristotle three names that would shape human thought for centuries to come. As Athens grew in wealth and power, its influence spread across the Aegean. The Delian League, once a voluntary alliance, became a tool of Athenian rule. Cities that tried to leave the league, like Naxos and Thasos, were forcibly brought back into the fold. Athens used its superior navy to control trade routes and ensure that tribute from its allies kept flowing. This expansion did not go unnoticed. Sparta, ever wary of Athenian ambition, watched with growing concern. Though the two cities had fought side by side against Persia, their differences were too great to ignore. Sparta valued discipline, order, and a rigid military structure. Athens, by contrast, championed democracy, debate, and cultural expression. The tension between the two superpowers of Greece began to simmer. Minor skirmishes and political maneuvering escalated into open hostility. Corinth, a powerful city caught between Athens and Sparta, found itself dragged into disputes. Alliances were forged, threats exchanged. By the middle of the 5th century BCE, it was clear Greece was on the brink of war. The very unity that had saved it from Persia was now crumbling. The Athenian Golden Age, for all its achievements, carried within it the seeds of its own downfall. Despite the looming conflict, Athens reached its peak under the leadership of Pericles. He embarked on an ambitious building program, funded by the wealth of the Delian League. The city, once ravaged by war, became a beacon of culture and learning. Pericles also expanded Athenian democracy, introducing reforms that allowed poorer citizens to participate in government. But Pericles was not just a builder, he was a visionary. He saw Athens as the undisputed leader of the Greek world, a city that could stand as an example to all others. His famous funeral oration, given during the early years of the Peloponnesian War, captured the Athenian spirit. "Our city is an education to all of Greece." Yet even as he spoke those words, war was closing in. The Golden Age was brilliant, but it would not last forever. Athens had reached the heights of glory, but it was about to be tested in ways it had never imagined. The rivalry between Athens and Sparta, fueled by jealousy, ambition, and the stark contrast of their societies, would soon explode into all-out war. The Peloponnesian War was coming, and it would change the course of Greek history forever. Athens had built an empire of culture, knowledge, and democracy. But could it survive the storm that was about to descend? The story of Greece was far from over. The brightest flames often burn the shortest, and the Golden Age of Athens, for all its brilliance, was no exception. The seeds of its triumph had also sown the roots of its downfall. As the dust settled from the Persian Wars, Athens emerged as the dominant power in Greece, basking in the glory of its victory. The city's fleet was unmatched, its wealth was growing, and its culture was flourishing. The 5th century BCE became known as the Golden Age of Athens, a time when art, philosophy, drama, and democracy reached new heights. Under the leadership of Pericles, the city transformed into a beacon of knowledge and creativity, laying the foundation for much of Western civilization. But as Athens grew stronger, so too did the tensions with its longtime rival, Sparta. What began as an era of prosperity would soon turn into a struggle for dominance, setting the stage for one of the most destructive conflicts in Greek history. Few leaders in history have shaped their city as profoundly as Pericles did for Athens. Born into an aristocratic family, Pericles was a skilled orator, a visionary statesman, and a firm believer in democracy. When he took power in the mid-5th century BCE, Athens was already a strong city, but under his rule it became an unrivaled center of culture and politics. Pericles expanded democracy, allowing more citizens to participate in government. He introduced reforms that ensured even the poorest Athenians could take part in the democratic process by paying them for their public service. The assembly, where all free male citizens could vote on laws and policies, became the true heart of Athenian politics. Unlike Sparta, where a select few controlled the government, Athens prided itself on being ruled by the people. But Pericles' most ambitious project was the rebuilding of Athens. The Persian invasion had left much of the city in ruins, and Pericles saw an opportunity to turn it into a masterpiece. With funds from the Delian League, a military alliance led by Athens, he commissioned the construction of the Parthenon, a magnificent temple dedicated to Athena, the city's patron goddess. Its towering columns and intricate sculptures became a symbol of Athenian greatness, and its design influenced architecture for centuries to come. Beyond politics and architecture, Athens became the intellectual capital of the ancient world, attracting thinkers, artists, and scientists from across Greece. It was here that philosophy flourished, drama was perfected, and the foundations of history and science were laid. If there was one thing that set Athens apart from other civilizations, it was its relentless pursuit of knowledge. The city became a breeding ground for some of the greatest minds in history, men who questioned the nature of reality, ethics, and the universe itself. At the heart of this intellectual revolution was Socrates, a philosopher who challenged conventional wisdom and encouraged people to think for themselves. Unlike other teachers who simply provided answers, Socrates used a method of questioning, pushing his students to examine their beliefs and seek deeper truths. His famous saying, "The unexamined life is not worth living," became a cornerstone of philosophical thought. Socrates had no written works. His ideas were preserved by his student Plato. Plato took his mentor's teachings and expanded on them, creating a vision of an ideal society in his famous work, The Republic. He believed that philosophers should be rulers, as only those who sought wisdom could truly govern justly. He also founded the Academy, the first known institution of higher learning, where future thinkers would study for generations. One of Plato's most brilliant students was Aristotle. Unlike his teacher, Aristotle focused on observing the natural world, laying the groundwork for science and logic. His writings covered everything from biology to politics to ethics, and his ideas influenced scholars for centuries. Even today, much of modern philosophy and science can trace its roots back to Aristotle's work. This explosion of knowledge wasn't limited to philosophy. Athens became the birthplace of history itself, thanks to Herodotus and Thucydides. Herodotus, often called the father of history, wrote detailed accounts of the Persian Wars, blending storytelling with factual reporting. Thucydides, on the other hand, took a more analytical approach, documenting the Peloponnesian War with a focus on political and military strategy. His writings remain some of the most insightful historical records ever produced. The Golden Age wasn't just about politics and philosophy. It was also a time of artistic and theatrical brilliance. The Greeks didn't just invent drama, they perfected it. The great playwrights of Athens created stories that explored the human condition, tragedy, comedy, and morality in ways that still resonate today. Aeschylus, known as the father of tragedy, wrote powerful plays about fate and justice, often drawing inspiration from mythology. Sophocles, his successor, took drama to new heights with plays like Oedipus Rex, which explored destiny and the consequences of human actions. Euripides, the most modern of the three, focused on complex emotions and the struggles of individuals, challenging traditional beliefs about gods and society. Comedy, too, flourished in Athens. Aristophanes, the greatest comedic playwright of the time, used satire to poke fun at politicians, war, and even philosophy. His works, such as Lysistrata, were bold, irreverent, and filled with sharp wit, showing that the Athenians could laugh at themselves even in times of turmoil. Art and sculpture also reached new heights. The Greeks developed a style that emphasized balance, realism, and movement. Sculptors like Phidias created breathtaking statues of gods and heroes, capturing the ideal human form in marble and bronze. These works would later inspire Renaissance artists and continue to influence modern aesthetics. As Athens flourished, its power expanded beyond its borders. What had begun as a defensive alliance, the Delian League, slowly turned into an Athenian empire. Pericles used the League's navy and resources to strengthen Athens, but this came at a cost. Other Greek city-states began to see Athens as a bully rather than a protector. Sparta, in particular, viewed Athenian expansion with growing suspicion. The rivalry between Athens and Sparta had always existed, but now it was becoming dangerous. The Peloponnesian League, led by Sparta, grew increasingly hostile toward Athens, accusing it of abusing its power. In 431 BCE, tensions reached a breaking point, and war erupted between the two greatest city-states of Greece. The Peloponnesian War would rage for nearly 3 decades, bringing devastation to the Greek world. The cultural achievements of the Golden Age would be overshadowed by the horrors of conflict. The mighty Athens, once the shining jewel of Greece, would see its power decline. But even as war loomed, the legacy of this era would endure. The ideas, art, and innovations born in the Golden Age of Greece would shape the course of history. Democracy, philosophy, drama, and science. These gifts from Athens would be carried forward, influencing civilizations across time. The Golden Age had reached its peak, but now the storm was coming. The next chapter of Greek history would be written not in philosophy and poetry, but in blood and betrayal. As the Golden Age of Athens flourished, so too did the tensions brewing beneath the surface. While the city thrived under Pericles' leadership, boasting magnificent architecture, philosophical advancements, and a naval empire, their growing influence alarmed the other Greek city-states. Chief among them was Sparta, the militaristic powerhouse of the Peloponnesian Peninsula. For decades, Athens and Sparta had been uneasy allies, standing together against the Persian threat. But once the Persian Wars ended, the true nature of their rivalry became clear. The Delian League, initially formed as a defensive alliance under Athenian leadership, had evolved into a de facto Athenian empire, where dissenting members were swiftly crushed. Meanwhile, Sparta and its allies, forming the Peloponnesian League, saw Athens rise as a direct threat to their way of life. What began as political maneuvering soon escalated into full-scale war, a war that would last for nearly 3 decades and forever change the Greek world. By 431 BCE, the tension between Athens and Sparta had reached its breaking point. Athens, confident in its naval supremacy and cultural influence, continued to expand its sphere of control, exerting dominance over the Aegean Sea. Meanwhile, Sparta, deeply suspicious of Athenian imperialism, gathered its allies and prepared for war. The Peloponnesian War was not just a struggle for power. It was a clash of 2 fundamentally different civilizations. Athens represented democracy, naval dominance, and intellectual achievement. Sparta, on the other hand, embodied oligarchy, land-based military superiority, and an unwavering warrior culture. Their rivalry was not only political but ideological. Each saw the other's way of life as incompatible with its own. When Athens imposed economic sanctions on Corinth, a key ally of Sparta, the situation reached a boiling point. Sparta, unable to tolerate Athenian interference any longer, issued an ultimatum: Athens must back down or there would be war. Pericles, believing in Athens' strength, refused to concede. The war began. Sparta's initial strategy was straightforward: invade Athenian territory and force the city into submission. Led by King Archidamus II, the Spartan army marched into Attica, ravaging the countryside. However, Pericles had prepared for such an assault. Rather than engaging the formidable Spartan hoplites in open battle, he devised a defensive strategy. Athenians would retreat behind the city's massive walls, relying on their superior navy to maintain supply lines and strike Spartan territories by sea. First, this plan seemed sound. The Athenian navy raided Spartan coastal settlements, cutting off resources and keeping the war in balance. But disaster soon struck within the city itself. In 430 BCE, a devastating plague broke out in Athens, sweeping through the overcrowded population trapped behind the city walls. Killed tens of thousands, including Pericles himself. With his death, Athens lost its greatest strategist, and internal discord began to take root. Despite this tragedy, Athens fought on, led by more aggressive leaders like Cleon, who sought to take the war to Sparta's doorstep. The conflict dragged on, with victories and losses on both sides. Then, in 421 BCE, a fragile peace was brokered, the Peace of Nicias. Both Athens and Sparta agreed to a temporary truce, exhausted by years of conflict. But this peace was merely an illusion, a brief pause before the war reignited with even greater fury. Despite the truce, hostilities simmered beneath the surface. Athens, still ambitious and eager to expand its power, turned its gaze westward to Sicily. The island was home to the powerful city of Syracuse, a Spartan ally. In 415 BCE, the Athenian assembly, influenced by the fiery politician Alcibiades, launched a massive military expedition to conquer Sicily and cripple Spartan influence. What followed was one of the greatest miscalculations in ancient warfare. The Athenian fleet, numbering over 200 ships and thousands of men, set sail with high hopes. However, the campaign was plagued by strategic errors and betrayal. Alcibiades, the mastermind behind the expedition, was accused of sacrilege and fled to Sparta, where he advised the Spartans on how to defeat his former city. Without strong leadership, the Athenian forces became disorganized. The siege of Syracuse dragged on, and the Athenians found themselves trapped. In 413 BCE, the Spartans, now fully committed to the war, sent reinforcements. The Athenian fleet was annihilated, and thousands of soldiers were either slaughtered or captured. Those who survived were thrown into the infamous stone quarries of Syracuse, left to die in darkness. The Sicilian expedition was a disaster of unimaginable scale. Athens, once the dominant power of Greece, had suffered a blow from which it would never fully recover. With Athens weakened, Sparta seized the opportunity to strike a final blow. Led by the cunning general Lysander, the Spartans formed an alliance with the Persian Empire, securing the financial resources needed to build a formidable navy. The war had now shifted from land to sea, and for the first time, Athens faced a true naval rival. One by one, Athenian allies defected. The once mighty Delian League crumbled as city-states abandoned their former protector. The decisive moment came in 405 BCE at the Battle of Aegospotami. The Spartan fleet, using superior tactics, ambushed and destroyed nearly the entire Athenian navy. With their navy gone, Athens was defenseless. The Spartans laid siege to the city, cutting off food and supplies. Starvation and despair gripped the population. In 404 BCE, Athens, the city that had once defied the mighty Persian Empire, surrendered to Sparta. The once great democracy was dismantled. The long walls, which had protected Athens for generations, were torn down. A pro-Spartan oligarchy, known as the 30 Tyrants, was installed, ruling Athens with an iron fist. The Golden Age was over. Athens, though still a cultural beacon, would never again rise to the level of power it had once known. The Peloponnesian War had devastated Greece. Cities lay in ruins, populations were decimated, and the unity that had once repelled the Persian invasion was gone. The conflict had not only destroyed Athens but had also left Sparta weakened. Though victorious, the Spartans lacked the political and economic stability to maintain dominance. This vacuum of power opened the door for a new force to emerge, one that would change the course of history forever. To the north, in the rugged land of Macedon, a young prince named Philip was watching. The Greeks, once mighty, were now divided and vulnerable. Soon, a new era would dawn, one that would see the rise of an empire greater than anything Greece had ever known. The Peloponnesian War was the final chapter of classical Greece as an independent power. It was a war of ambition, pride, and betrayal, a tragic conflict that left its scars on history. But even in its downfall, Greece's legacy endured. Its art, philosophy, and ideas had already taken root, spreading far beyond its shores. Now, with Athens and Sparta weakened, a new chapter was about to begin, one that would see the rise of Alexander the Great and the spread of Greek culture across the known world. As the Greek city-states lay in disarray after the Peloponnesian War, a new power emerged from the northern frontier. Macedon, once considered a backwater kingdom by the proud city-states of southern Greece, was now poised to reshape the course of history. At its helm stood a man of extraordinary vision and ambition, Philip II. His rise to power would not only unite the fractured Greek world, but also lay the foundation for one of the greatest empires the world had ever seen. The Peloponnesian War had left Greece in ruins. Athens, though still a center of culture and philosophy, had lost its military and political dominance. Sparta, victorious in war, found itself ill-equipped to rule. Its rigid military society, suited for war but not governance, struggled to maintain control over its unwilling allies. Meanwhile, Thebes, once a minor power, had begun to challenge Spartan supremacy, leading to further conflicts and instability. The constant infighting among the city-states left Greece vulnerable. The idea of a unified Hellenic world seemed impossible, as old rivalries and territorial disputes kept the cities locked in perpetual conflict. It was in this moment of weakness that Philip II of Macedon seized his opportunity. Philip II was not merely a warrior, he was a strategist, a diplomat, and a visionary. Born in 382 BCE, Philip had spent part of his youth as a hostage in Thebes, where he studied Greek military tactics. Observing the renowned Theban army and its elite, sacred band, he learned firsthand the strengths and weaknesses of the Greek way of war. When Philip ascended the throne in 359 BCE, Macedon was a divided and vulnerable kingdom. Internal strife, external threats from Thracians and Illyrians, and a weak military made it seem unlikely that Macedon would rise to greatness. But Philip had other plans. His first step was to reform the Macedonian army. He introduced the phalanx, a new and improved version of the traditional Greek formation. Unlike the hoplites of Athens and Sparta, who carried short spears, Philip armed his men with the sarissa, a long pike that could keep enemies at bay. He also trained his soldiers in professional, year-round warfare rather than relying on seasonal militias. With discipline, innovation, and superior tactics, Philip transformed the Macedonian army into an unstoppable force. Before Philip could turn his attention to Greece, he had to secure his own kingdom. The Illyrians, a fierce warrior people to the west, posed a constant threat. In a decisive campaign, Philip crushed them in battle, establishing Macedon as the dominant power in the region. He then turned his attention to Thrace and the rich gold mines of Mount Pangaean, which would finance his growing ambitions. With his borders secure and his army strengthened, Philip was ready to intervene in Greek affairs. Philip understood that brute force alone would not be enough to conquer Greece. The Greek city-states were fiercely independent and suspicious of foreign rulers. Instead of waging open war immediately, Philip used diplomacy, bribery, and political maneuvering to weaken his enemies. He positioned himself as a protector of Greek culture, claiming that Macedon was part of the Greek world. He played city-states against one another, offering military support to some while undermining others. Using a combination of alliances and strategic marriages, Philip slowly expanded his influence over central and northern Greece. His opportunity came in the Third Sacred War, 356 to 346 BCE. The war had erupted between Thebes and Phocis over the control of Delphi, the sacred religious center of Greece. Philip, portraying himself as the defender of the gods, intervened and crushed the Phocians. This victory not only earned him prestige but also a seat in the Amphictyonic League, a powerful religious and political council in Greece. For the first time, a Macedonian king was being recognized as a legitimate leader in Greek affairs. Despite Philip's growing power, many Greek city-states still viewed him as an outsider. Athens and Thebes, sensing the threat he posed, formed an alliance to stop him. In 338 BCE, the two forces met Philip's army at the Battle of Chaeronea, a battle that would decide the fate of Greece. Philip's forces were disciplined, well-trained, and expertly led. But what made the battle truly remarkable was the role played by his young son, Alexander. Just 18 years old, Alexander commanded the cavalry and led a decisive charge that broke the Theban lines. The battle ended in a crushing defeat for the Greeks. With this victory, Philip became the undisputed master of Greece. After Chaeronea, Philip showed remarkable restraint. Instead of destroying Athens and Thebes, he sought to unify Greece under Macedonian leadership. In 337 BCE, he formed the League of Corinth, a federation of Greek city-states with himself as its leader. The League's stated goal was to unite Greece and launch a war against Persia, avenging the Persian invasions of the past. For the first time in history, Greece was united, not under the rule of Athens or Sparta, but under the banner of Macedon. Philip's triumph, however, was short-lived. In 336 BCE, as he prepared for his grand invasion of Persia, tragedy struck. During a grand celebration, Philip was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards, Pausanias. The motives behind the killing remain a mystery. Some believe it was a personal vendetta, while others suspect a larger conspiracy involving rival factions or even his wife, Olympias. With Philip's death, the fate of Macedon and Greece hung in the balance. But the legacy he left behind was undeniable. He had taken a weak and fragmented kingdom and turned it into a dominant force. He had achieved what no Greek city-state had, unity. And now, the torch had passed to his son, Alexander, who would take his father's dream of conquering Persia and turn it into something far greater, an empire that would stretch across 3 continents. Philip II was more than just a conqueror. He was a visionary who reshaped the Greek world. His military innovations would influence warfare for centuries. His political strategies, blending force and diplomacy, laid the groundwork for empire building. Though his reign ended in assassination, his impact endured. Without Philip, there would have been no Alexander the Great. Without Macedon's rise, the fragmented Greek city-states might have remained in endless conflict. Now, as Alexander prepared to ascend the throne, the world stood on the brink of an era unlike any before. The dream of Greek expansion, long confined to the Mediterranean, was about to explode onto the grandest stage imaginable, the vast Persian Empire. A new chapter was about to begin. The age of Alexander had arrived. The death of Philip II in 336 BCE left a power vacuum in Macedon. But his son, a young man of only 20, was ready to seize the throne. This was no ordinary ruler. This was Alexander, a man who would go down in history as Alexander the Great. With the discipline instilled by his father and the wisdom gained from his tutor, Aristotle, Alexander embarked on a campaign that would reshape the known world. His ambition was not just to rule Greece or Macedon. His destiny was far greater. He would take the war to Persia, the empire that had once threatened Greece, and carve out a realm that stretched from the Mediterranean to the edges of India. This is the story of how Alexander changed history forever. When Philip II was assassinated, Macedon was in a precarious position. Though Philip had created a powerful army and unified Greece under the League of Corinth, his death left everything uncertain. Many Greek city-states, particularly Athens and Thebes, saw this as an opportunity to break free from Macedonian rule. But Alexander moved quickly. Despite his youth, he was no stranger to war. He had fought at Chaeronea alongside his father and had already displayed brilliance in battle. He crushed internal rivals, secured his throne, and marched south to reassert Macedonian authority. His first major challenge came from Thebes, which had risen in rebellion. Alexander's response was swift and brutal. He destroyed Thebes, reducing the city to rubble and slaughtering its defenders. The message was clear: Macedon's grip on Greece would not be broken. The remaining city-states submitted without further resistance. Now, with Greece under control, Alexander turned his sights eastward to Persia. For decades, Persia had been the great nemesis of Greece. The Greco-Persian Wars, fought over a century earlier, had seen Greek city-states unite to drive back the Persian invasions of Darius and Xerxes. Now, Alexander sought vengeance and glory. In 334 BCE, he crossed the Hellespont, modern-day Dardanelles, with an army of 40,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry. His first stop was Troy, the legendary city of Homer's Iliad. Here, he paid tribute to Achilles, his supposed ancestor, setting the stage for his own epic conquest. His first major test came at the Battle of the Granicus River. Persian satraps, governors, had assembled a large force to halt Alexander's advance. The battle was fierce, but Alexander's superior tactics and leadership overwhelmed the Persian forces. He personally led a cavalry charge, cutting through the Persian lines and securing a decisive victory. This victory opened Asia Minor, modern Turkey, to him. As he marched through the region, many Greek cities under Persian rule welcomed him as a liberator. One by one, the Persian strongholds fell, and Alexander continued his march eastward. By 333 BCE, the Persian king Darius III had realized the scale of the threat. He assembled a massive army and personally led it against Alexander. The two forces met at the Battle of Issus, in what is now southern Turkey. Despite being vastly outnumbered, Alexander's army fought with incredible discipline. Using his phalanx formations and superior cavalry tactics, he broke through the Persian center, forcing Darius to flee the battlefield. This was a humiliating defeat for the Persian king. Even worse, Alexander captured Darius' wife, mother, and daughters, whom he treated with remarkable respect. With this victory, Alexander now controlled all of the eastern Mediterranean, including Syria, Phoenicia, and Egypt. Unlike Persia, Egypt did not resist Alexander. The Egyptians, who had been under Persian rule for nearly 200 years, saw him as a liberator. He entered Egypt peacefully in 332 BCE and was crowned as pharaoh. While in Egypt, Alexander founded a new city, Alexandria. This city would become one of the greatest centers of learning, culture, and commerce in the ancient world. It was here that the famous Library of Alexandria would later be built, preserving knowledge for centuries. During his time in Egypt, Alexander also made a journey to the Siwa oasis, where he consulted the oracle of Ammonius. According to legend, the oracle declared him the son of Zeus, reinforcing his belief in his divine destiny. With Egypt secured, Alexander set his sights on the heart of the Persian Empire. Darius III, desperate to stop him, raised another massive army, reportedly over 200,000 soldiers. The final confrontation took place in 331 BCE at Gaugamela, near modern-day Iraq. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Alexander's tactical brilliance once again proved decisive. He lured the Persians into a trap, using gaps in their lines to launch a devastating cavalry assault. Once again, Darius fled, leaving his army to be massacred. With this victory, Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, the great cities of Persia, fell to Alexander. He marched into Persepolis, the ceremonial capital, and in a symbolic act of revenge for the burning of Athens during the Greco-Persian Wars, he burned the Persian palace to the ground. With Darius on the run and the Persian Empire collapsing, Alexander pursued him deep into the eastern provinces. In 330 BCE, Darius was betrayed and murdered by his own men. His death marked the official end of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Now, Alexander was not just the king of Macedon and Greece. He was the ruler of the largest empire the world had ever seen. At just 26 years old, Alexander had conquered the Persian Empire, an achievement that generations of Greeks had only dreamed of. But he was not finished. His eyes turned further east, toward India and the unknown lands beyond. His ambition knew no bounds. But as his empire expanded, so too did the challenges. His soldiers, exhausted after years of relentless conquest, would soon question how far they were willing to follow him. And though he had built the foundations of an empire, its fate after his death would remain uncertain. The story of Alexander was far from over. The next chapter would take him beyond the known world, to the edge of the earth itself. By 330 BCE, Alexander the Great had achieved what no other Greek had even dared to dream. He had conquered the entire Persian Empire, from the Mediterranean to the edge of Central Asia. Kings and cities that once stood mighty had fallen before him. The legendary wealth of Persia, stored in the grand palaces of Susa and Persepolis, was now in his hands. Yet, for Alexander, conquest was never enough. He craved new lands, new challenges, and greater glory. He looked beyond the Persian Empire, beyond the world the Greeks had known, toward the vast and mysterious lands of India. But every conqueror, no matter how great, has limits. This is the story of Alexander's final campaigns, the battles, the betrayals, and the moment when even the greatest general realized he could go no further. Despite his crushing defeat at Gaugamela, Darius III still lived. Alexander could not allow his rival to remain a threat, so he chased him deep into the eastern provinces of Persia. The pursuit took him across the harsh deserts and high mountains of modern Iran and Afghanistan, where he continued to crush resistance and secure his rule. But in 330 BCE, Alexander's chase came to a shocking end. Darius had been betrayed by one of his own satraps, Bessus, who declared himself the new king of Persia. But rather than leading a last stand, Bessus had Darius assassinated and left his body to rot on the roadside. When Alexander found Darius' corpse, he reportedly wept. Though they had been enemies, Alexander believed Darius deserved a warrior's death. He gave him a royal funeral and vowed to punish Bessus for his betrayal. This marked the official end of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. But Alexander was far from finished. His next move would take him into the wild, unconquered lands of the East. Alexander now turned his attention to Bactria and Sogdiana, in modern-day Afghanistan and Central Asia. But unlike his swift victories in Persia, these lands would prove to be his greatest challenge yet. The rugged terrain, fierce tribal warriors, and never-ending resistance tested Alexander like never before. The local warlords refused to fight traditional battles. Instead, they used guerrilla tactics, ambushing his forces and disappearing into the mountains. One of the fiercest leaders was Spitamenes, a Sogdian noble who waged a brutal resistance against Macedonian rule. Alexander responded with ruthless tactics, destroying villages, massacring rebels, and using terror to break their will. The war dragged on for nearly 3 years, longer than any other campaign he had fought. To secure the loyalty of these regions, Alexander also adopted Persian customs and took a Persian wife, Roxana, the daughter of a noble from Bactria. This decision was controversial. Many of his Greek and Macedonian officers resented his increasing adoption of foreign traditions. Despite the brutal resistance, Alexander eventually crushed all opposition. By 327 BCE, Central Asia was firmly under his control. But even as he celebrated, his mind was already set on his next goal, India. The lands beyond Persia had always been shrouded in mystery for the Greeks. They had heard tales of vast kingdoms, mighty war elephants, and warriors unlike any they had ever faced. In 326 BCE, Alexander led his army across the Hindu Kush Mountains into what is now modern Pakistan and northern India. His first encounters with Indian rulers were peaceful. Many, fearing his power, surrendered without a fight. But not all. At the Battle of the Hydaspes, Alexander faced King Porus, a ruler who refused to bow to the Macedonian invader. Porus commanded an army of 50,000 men, 200 war elephants, and thousands of chariots. The elephants, in particular, were a terrifying sight for the Greeks, who had never fought such beasts in battle. Despite the odds, Alexander outmaneuvered Porus. Using clever tactics and superior discipline, he forced the Indian king into retreat. But instead of executing him, Alexander, impressed by Porus' bravery, allowed him to keep his throne under Macedonian rule. After this victory, Alexander pushed further east, reaching the Bias River. Beyond it lay the vast and unknown lands of the Ganges Valley, filled with even more powerful kingdoms. But then, something happened that had never happened before. His army refused to go further. For 10 years, Alexander's men had followed him across thousands of miles, through deserts, mountains, and jungles. They had fought countless battles, conquered the mightiest empire on earth, and faced dangers no Greek had ever seen. But they were tired, homesick, and weary of war. At the banks of the Bias River, the soldiers mutinied. They refused to march any further, no matter how much Alexander pleaded. For the first time in his career, Alexander was forced to turn back. He had never lost a battle, but this was a different kind of defeat, one he could not conquer with weapons. Alexander's return to Babylon was just as dangerous as his conquests. Rather than taking the safe route back through Persia, he led his men through the Gadrosian Desert, modern southern Iran. It was one of the harshest deserts in the world, and his army suffered terrible losses. Thousands died from thirst, exhaustion, and heat. Despite these hardships, Alexander eventually reached Babylon in 323 BCE, where he planned to consolidate his empire and prepare for new campaigns. He dreamed of conquering Arabia, North Africa, and beyond. But fate had other plans. In June 323 BCE, at just 32 years old, Alexander fell gravely ill. After days of suffering, he died in Babylon. The cause of his death remains a mystery. Some believe he was poisoned, while others think he succumbed to malaria, typhoid, or exhaustion from years of constant campaigning. With no clear heir, his empire fell into chaos, sparking a series of civil wars that would eventually divide it among his generals. The empire he had built did not last, but his legend did. Though Alexander's empire crumbled, his influence shaped the world for centuries. His conquests spread Greek culture, ideas, and philosophy across the ancient world, blending with Persian, Egyptian, and Indian traditions. This era, known as the Hellenistic Age, saw Greek knowledge, science, and art flourish across the Mediterranean and Asia. Cities he founded, like Alexandria in Egypt, became centers of learning and culture. Alexander had redrawn the map of history, creating a new world where East and West were forever connected. Though he died young, his name remains immortal. The greatest general in history, the man who conquered the known world, and the ruler who refused to stop, Alexander the Great. When Alexander the Great took his final breath in Babylon in 323 BCE, the world stood at a crossroads. For over a decade, he had marched from Greece to the edges of India, carving out the largest empire the world had ever seen. But with his sudden death at just 32 years old, his mighty empire was left without a clear ruler. His generals, the very men who had fought beside him, now faced an impossible question. Who would rule the empire of Alexander the Great? But there was no single answer. Instead, chaos erupted, and the empire that had been forged in blood and ambition began to tear itself apart. This is the story of the Hellenistic world, the era after Alexander, the wars, the betrayals, and the rise of new kingdoms that would shape the course of history. In his final moments, Alexander was asked who should inherit his empire. His supposed reply? To the strongest. This single phrase unleashed a war that would last nearly 50 years. With no legitimate heir, only a newborn son and a mentally unstable half-brother, Alexander's top generals, known as the Diadochi, Greek for successors, each sought to claim a piece of his empire. The key figures in this struggle were Perdiccas, Alexander's top general, who initially tried to hold the empire together; Ptolemy, the cunning ruler who took Egypt and founded a dynasty that would last for 300 years; Antigonus the One-Eyed, the ambitious general who sought to reunite Alexander's empire under his rule; Seleucus, the warrior who carved out a vast eastern empire, stretching from Syria to India; Cassander, the ruthless opportunist who seized control of Macedonia and Greece. The first war erupted immediately after Alexander's death. Perdiccas, acting as regent for Alexander's son, tried to maintain unity, but his heavy-handed rule led to rebellion. In 321 BCE, he was assassinated, and the dream of keeping the empire whole died with him. From that point forward, the empire fractured into warring kingdoms. The once united Macedonian army turned on itself, and generals who had fought side by side for years now fought to the death for power. By 301 BCE, after decades of conflict, the dust settled. Alexander's empire had been divided into three major Hellenistic kingdoms. The Ptolemaic Kingdom, Egypt, ruled by Ptolemy and his descendants, including Cleopatra, the last of the dynasty. The Seleucid Empire, Asia, the largest and most diverse, stretching from Syria to the borders of India. The Antigonid Kingdom, Macedonia and Greece, the homeland of Alexander, controlled by the descendants of Antigonus. Though the empire was gone, Greek culture, philosophy, and military tactics continued to spread across the known world. Despite its violent birth, the Hellenistic Age, 323 to 30 BCE, became one of the most culturally rich and scientifically advanced periods in history. The three major kingdoms, while constantly at war, brought Greek ideas to the farthest corners of the world. Hellenistic cities, built in Alexander's name, became centers of learning, trade, and power. Alexandria in Egypt, founded by Alexander himself, became the intellectual capital of the world. The Library of Alexandria housed thousands of scrolls, preserving and expanding Greek knowledge. Greek architecture, language, and philosophy blended with Eastern traditions, creating a unique fusion of cultures. The kings of these new empires saw themselves as heirs to Alexander, but they had different priorities. Unlike him, they focused on ruling and governing, rather than endless conquest. This era wasn't just about war and politics. It was a golden age of knowledge. Archimedes of Syracuse developed groundbreaking principles in mathematics and engineering. Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference with stunning accuracy. Euclid wrote the most influential book on geometry, still studied today. Hero of Alexandria invented the first steam-powered device, 2,000 years before the Industrial Revolution. The spread of Greek ideas across Egypt, Persia, and India laid the foundation for future civilizations, influencing the Romans, Byzantines, and even the Islamic Golden Age centuries later. For all their achievements, the Hellenistic kingdoms were built on fragile alliances and constant warfare. The kings, like Alexander, never stopped fighting, against each other and against growing external threats. But a new power was rising in the West: Rome. At first, the Romans admired Greek culture. They adopted Greek gods, art, and military tactics. But admiration did not mean mercy. The growing Roman Republic saw the divided Hellenistic kingdoms as weak and ripe for conquest. One by one, they fell. Macedonia was defeated in 168 BCE. The Seleucid Empire crumbled under Roman pressure. In 31 BCE, the last Hellenistic ruler, Cleopatra of Egypt, fell to Rome, marking the official end of the Hellenistic Age. The Hellenistic legacy, the world after Alexander. Even though the Hellenistic kingdoms disappeared, their influence never faded. Greek culture, philosophy, and science became the foundation of the Roman world and, later, Western civilization. The Romans adopted Greek education, government, and philosophy, spreading it across their empire. Greek became the international language, much like English today. The ideas of Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates influenced future generations, shaping modern science, democracy, and ethics. Even today, our world is still shaped by the Hellenistic Age. From democracy to architecture, from literature to astronomy, the impact of Alexander's conquests and the kingdoms that followed can still be seen in every corner of the globe. Alexander's empire did not survive, but his dream of a connected world did. Through blood and conquest, he spread Greek culture beyond its borders, creating a world where ideas flowed freely between East and West. The Hellenistic Age was not just about war, it was about transformation. The blending of cultures, the expansion of knowledge, and the creation of something greater than any single kingdom. It was an era that defined the ancient world and continues to shape the modern one. Alexander may have died, but his story, the story of a world forever changed by his ambition, lives on. By the 3rd century BCE, the Mediterranean world was dominated by two great forces. In the east, the once mighty Greek world was now divided among the Hellenistic kingdoms Macedonia, the Seleucid Empire, and Egypt. Though weakened by internal conflicts, they still clung to their wealth, influence, and ancient legacies. In the West, a new power was rising: Rome. Once a minor city-state, Rome had grown into a military juggernaut, hungry for expansion. At first, it had fought only local enemies in Italy, but as its armies grew stronger, so did its ambitions. The stage was set for a clash that would determine the future of the ancient world. Rome's expansion had been steady and relentless. After crushing the Carthaginians in the Punic Wars, Rome turned its gaze toward Greece. The wealthy and sophisticated Greek world fascinated the Romans, but it also seemed politically unstable and ripe for conquest. The first serious encounter between Rome and Greece occurred in 280 BCE, when the Greek king Pyrrhus of Epirus attempted to challenge Roman power. Pyrrhus was a brilliant general, even compared to Alexander the Great, but despite early victories, his costly battles drained his resources. This gave rise to the famous term Pyrrhic victory, a win so devastating that it might as well be a loss. Pyrrhus ultimately failed, proving that even Greek warfare and strategy were not enough to stop Rome's rise. But this was only the beginning. By 200 BCE, Rome set its sights on Macedonia, the once mighty kingdom of Alexander. The Romans had already seen how divided the Hellenistic world was, and they were masters of exploiting political weakness. The Macedonian Wars, 214 to 148 BCE, were a series of brutal conflicts that sealed the fate of Greece. First Macedonian War, 214 to 205 BCE, Rome weakened Macedonia but didn't destroy it. Second Macedonian War, 200 to 197 BCE, Rome defeated King Philip V of Macedonia and declared Greece free, though in reality, Rome was now its master. Third Macedonian War, 171 to 168 BCE, Rome crushed Macedonia completely, and the last king, Perseus, was captured. After their victory in 168 BCE, the Romans paraded the defeated Greek kings through the streets of Rome, a public display that symbolized the end of Macedonian independence. Rome had not just conquered a nation, it had humiliated it. But even after this, some Greeks refused to submit. In 146 BCE, the city of Corinth, one of Greece's most famous and wealthiest cities, led a rebellion against Rome. The response was swift and brutal. Rome's general, Lucius Mummius, burned Corinth to the ground, slaughtering its inhabitants and selling the survivors into slavery. It was a warning to all of Greece. Rome was now in charge. By 146 BCE, Greece was no longer a land of free city-states. It was a Roman province. Though technically under Roman rule, Greek culture was not erased. In fact, Rome admired and adopted much of Greek civilization. Greek philosophers became Roman teachers. Romans like Cicero studied the works of Plato and Aristotle. Greek architecture and art influenced Rome. From temples to statues, Greek styles became standard in the Roman world. Even the Greek gods found a place in Rome, where they were renamed but worshipped in the same way. Zeus became Jupiter, Athena became Minerva, etc. Rome had conquered Greece militarily, but Greece conquered Rome culturally. Though mainland Greece had fallen, one Greek kingdom still stood: Ptolemaic Egypt. The last remnant of Alexander's empire, Egypt was ruled by the descendants of Ptolemy, one of Alexander's generals. For centuries, Egypt remained rich and powerful, thanks to its immense grain supply, its strategic location, and the legendary city of Alexandria, home to the famous Library of Alexandria. But even Egypt could not escape Rome's growing shadow. By the 1st century BCE, Rome had become the ultimate power in the Mediterranean. The fate of Egypt was sealed when Cleopatra VII, the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty, became entangled in Roman politics. First, she allied herself with Julius Caesar, then later with Mark Antony. But after Antony's defeat by Octavian, later Augustus Caesar, in 31 BCE, Egypt's independence was over. In 30 BCE, Cleopatra died, allegedly by suicide, and Egypt became a province of Rome. This event marked the official end of the Hellenistic world. Alexander's empire, once stretching from Greece to India, had finally fallen under Roman control. Even though Greece was now ruled by Rome, its influence did not fade, it only grew stronger. The Romans considered themselves the inheritors of Greek civilization. They studied Greek literature, philosophy, and politics. Greek slaves became tutors for wealthy Roman children, ensuring that Greek ideas continued to shape Roman minds. Greek science and medicine continued to advance under Roman rule, leading to discoveries that would shape the world for centuries. Greek culture became part of the foundation of the Roman Empire. Rome ruled Greece, but in many ways, Greece ruled Rome's imagination. By the end of the 1st century BCE, Greece as an independent civilization was gone, but its influence had only begun to spread. Rome's empire, stretching from Britain to the Middle East, was deeply influenced by Greek thought, art, and philosophy. The very ideas that had shaped Athens, Sparta, and Macedonia now shaped Rome, and through Rome, the entire Western world. The impact of Greece did not die with its independence. It lived on in the Roman Empire, and even after Rome fell, Greek civilization continued to shape the course of history through the Byzantines, the Renaissance, and even the modern world. Though the cities of Greece may have crumbled, its ideas, democracy, philosophy, art, and science remain eternal. By the 4th century CE, the Roman Empire was crumbling under its own weight. The once mighty empire that had dominated the Mediterranean for centuries was now split in two, the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. While the West fell into chaos and eventually collapsed in 476 CE, the East thrived. This eastern half, known as the Byzantine Empire, was far more than just a continuation of Rome. It was a Greek empire in everything but name, Greek in language, Greek in culture, and deeply influenced by the civilization that had given birth to democracy, philosophy, and art centuries earlier. The story of Byzantium is not just the survival of the Roman Empire, it is the survival of Greek civilization itself. The Byzantine Empire's origins can be traced back to Emperor Constantine the Great. In 330 CE, he made a historic decision that would reshape history. He moved the capital of the empire from Rome to a new city in the east, Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul. This was not just a strategic move. Rome was in decline, but the eastern provinces were still wealthy and strong. The eastern Mediterranean had always been the heart of Greek civilization, with cities like Athens, Alexandria, and Antioch flourishing for centuries. Constantinople was built on the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, which had been founded by Greek settlers centuries earlier. From its very foundation, it was Greek in spirit, even as it adopted Roman law and governance. Greek became the dominant language of the empire, replacing Latin over time. Greek philosophy and education flourished in the great schools of Constantinople. Greek architecture shaped the city, with grand structures inspired by the temples of old. Byzantium was Roman by law but Greek by culture. One of Byzantium's greatest legacies was its role in shaping Christianity. By the 4th century CE, Christianity had spread throughout the Roman world, but it was in the Byzantine Empire that it truly flourished. The Greek-speaking world played a crucial role in shaping Christian theology, with figures like Saint Basil, Saint John Chrysostom, and Gregory of Nazianzus developing doctrines that still influence Christianity today. In 1054 CE, a major event shook the Christian world, the Great Schism. The Christian Church split into two branches: the Roman Catholic Church in the West, led by the Pope in Rome; the Eastern Orthodox Church, centered in Constantinople, which followed Greek traditions. This division still exists today, with the Greek Orthodox Church tracing its roots directly to Byzantine Christianity. Greek thought, philosophy, and traditions were woven into the very fabric of Christian teachings, ensuring that Greek civilization continued to shape religion for centuries. While Western Europe fell into the Dark Ages, Byzantium kept the flame of Greek knowledge alive. Greek literature was preserved, Homer's epics, Aristotle's philosophy, and Plato's ideas were copied and studied in Byzantine schools. Byzantine art flourished, drawing on Greek traditions but blending them with Christian themes. Mosaics, icons, and grand churches like Hagia Sophia stood as symbols of Byzantine power and faith. Greek science and medicine thrived. Scholars like Galen and Ptolemy had their works copied and studied in Byzantine universities. The Byzantines saw themselves as the heirs of classical Greece, and they made sure that Greek civilization would not be forgotten. Despite its strength, the Byzantine Empire was constantly under threat. In 1204 CE, the Fourth Crusade, launched by Western European Christians, sacked Constantinople, devastating the city and nearly ending the empire. In 1453 CE, after centuries of fighting against the Ottoman Turks, Constantinople finally fell. The last Byzantine emperor, Constantine XI, died defending the city, and the empire that had once been the greatest power in the world was gone. But even in defeat, Byzantium's influence did not vanish. It simply migrated elsewhere. When Constantinople fell, many Greek scholars fled to Italy, bringing with them the ancient texts of Plato, Aristotle, and other Greek philosophers. This sparked the Renaissance, a cultural rebirth in Western Europe that revived interest in Greek art, science, and philosophy. Leonardo da Vinci studied Greek science and human anatomy, inspired by Byzantine texts. Nicholas Copernicus read Greek astronomical works, leading to his revolutionary ideas about the solar system. The Italian Renaissance was built on Greek foundations, proving that even though Byzantium had fallen, Greek civilization lived on. The legacy of Greek civilization in the modern world. Even today, we see the lasting impact of Greek civilization through Byzantium. The Greek Orthodox Church still thrives, with millions of followers across Greece, Russia, and Eastern Europe. Greek philosophy remains central to modern education. Ideas from Plato and Aristotle continue to influence politics, ethics, and science. Greek architecture inspired grand cathedrals, government buildings, and even modern skyscrapers. Byzantium was more than just an empire. It was the bridge that connected ancient Greece to the modern world. Greek civilization never truly died. It transformed, adapted, and lived on through Byzantium, shaping the course of history long after the fall of Greece and Rome. In many ways, we are still living in a world built on the foundation of Greek thought, just as the Byzantines did for over 1,000 years. For nearly 4 centuries, Greece was under Ottoman rule. The land that had once given birth to democracy, philosophy, and the arts was now part of an empire that suppressed its national identity. But the Greek spirit never faded. Centuries of occupation could not erase the memory of Alexander, Pericles, and Leonidas. By the early 19th century, Europe was changing. Revolutions in America and France had inspired people across the world to rise up against tyranny. And in 1821, the Greeks, too, decided that their time had come. This was not just a fight for independence. It was a battle for the very survival of Greek culture, language, and identity. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, Greece became part of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans ruled with an iron fist, imposing heavy taxes, suppressing Greek culture, and limiting personal freedoms. Greek Christians were treated as second-class citizens, forced to pay a tax for practicing their religion. Education in Greek was restricted, with many schools operating in secret. Greek intellectuals and scholars fled to the West, bringing their knowledge to Italy and helping to spark the Renaissance. Despite this oppression, Greek identity never disappeared. The Greek Orthodox Church played a crucial role, keeping the Greek language and traditions alive. Greek priests and teachers ensured that future generations would never forget who they were. For centuries, Greeks dreamed of liberation, whispering the words of their ancestors, freedom or death. The Greek War of Independence was not just about politics. It was a war of culture, faith, and survival. In March 1821, Greek revolutionaries, inspired by the American and French revolutions, launched an armed uprising against the Ottomans. The movement was led by the Philiki, a secret society that had spent years planning the rebellion. The war began with small victories. The city of Kalamata was liberated, giving the rebels a stronghold. The siege of Tripolitza in September 1821 ended with a Greek victory, marking a turning point in the war. Fighters like Theodoros Kalakatronis, Laskarina Bouboulina, and Georgios Karaiskakis became national heroes, leading the charge against the Ottomans. But the road to independence was long and brutal. The Ottomans retaliated with massacres, burning entire villages and executing Greek leaders. The most infamous of these was the Chios Massacre in 1822, where tens of thousands of Greeks were slaughtered. Yet, the more the Ottomans tried to crush the Greeks, the stronger the resistance grew. At first, the rest of Europe was hesitant to support the Greek cause. The great powers, Britain, France, and Russia, were reluctant to get involved. But everything changed when European intellectuals and artists began rallying behind the Greeks. Poets like Lord Byron traveled to Greece, writing about the heroic struggle and even fighting alongside the Greeks. Newspapers across Europe published stories of Ottoman atrocities, turning public opinion against the Turks. The ideals of ancient Greece were still deeply respected, and many in Europe saw the war as a battle between civilization and oppression. By 1827, the Greek revolutionaries were struggling. The Ottomans, backed by the powerful Egyptian army of Ibrahim Pasha, were close to crushing the rebellion. Then came a decisive moment. At the Battle of Navarino in October 1827, the British, French, and Russian navies destroyed the Ottoman fleet, ensuring Greek victory. With Ottoman power weakened, negotiations began. In 1830, the London Protocol officially recognized Greece as an independent state. Independence was won, but the new Greek state faced many challenges. The country was in ruins after nearly a decade of war. Political divisions between different factions created instability. Foreign powers, especially Britain, France, and Russia, influenced Greek politics, shaping the new government. In 1832, Greece became a monarchy, with King Otto of Bavaria placed on the throne by the European powers. Though Otto was foreign, he helped lay the foundation for the modern Greek state. Over the next decades, Greece struggled to expand its borders and rebuild its economy. But one thing was clear: after centuries of foreign rule, the Greek people were once again free. The War of 1821 was more than just a military conflict. It was a cultural and historical rebirth. The Greek language and heritage were saved, ensuring that modern Greece remained connected to its ancient past. The war inspired other oppressed nations. It became a symbol of resistance against tyranny. Greek nationalism was reignited, leading to future struggles for unification and expansion. The echoes of Leonidas at Thermopylae and Alexander's conquests could be heard once again. Greece had reclaimed its place in history, proving that no empire, no foreign ruler, and no oppression could ever truly erase the spirit of the Greek people. The war was over, but the story of modern Greece was just beginning. The Greek War of Independence had been won, but the battle for Greece's future had only just begun. The newly liberated nation faced political instability, economic hardship, and territorial disputes, struggling to establish itself in a world dominated by powerful empires. Yet, through wars, crises, and transformations, Greece persisted, proving that the spirit of its ancient ancestors still burned bright. From the rise of modern democracy to the challenges of the 20th and 21st centuries, Greece's journey has been one of resilience, ambition, and cultural revival. In 1832, Greece officially became a kingdom under King Otto of Bavaria, a German prince chosen by the European powers. Otto's reign was marked by efforts to modernize Greece, but his foreign background and autocratic rule led to growing discontent. In 1862, Otto was overthrown, and a new monarch, King George I, took the throne, ushering in a period of reform. Athens became the capital, and efforts to revive Greek culture, language, and heritage accelerated. The Megali idea, great idea, emerged, an ambitious dream to unite all Greek-speaking lands, including those still under Ottoman rule. By the late 19th century, Greece had expanded its borders, incorporating Thessaly and parts of Epirus, but tensions with the Ottoman Empire remained high. The early 20th century saw Greece at the center of two major conflicts: the Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913. These wars were fought between the Balkan states, Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Montenegro, and the weakening Ottoman Empire. In the First Balkan War, 1912, Greece and its allies drove the Ottomans out of most of the Balkans. In the Second Balkan War, 1913, Greece clashed with Bulgaria over territorial disputes, securing Macedonia, Crete, and parts of Epirus. By 1913, Greece's territory had nearly doubled, but new challenges lay ahead. When World War I erupted in 1914, Greece was divided. King Constantine I favored neutrality, while Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos wanted to join the Allies. This internal conflict led to a national schism, weakening Greece politically. After the war, Greece saw an opportunity to fulfill the Megali idea, to reclaim Greek-populated lands in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey. With Allied support, Greek forces invaded Smyrna, Izmir, in 1919, sparking the Greco-Turkish War, 1919 to 1922. At first, Greek troops advanced deep into Anatolia, but in 1922, Turkish forces under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk launched a counteroffensive. The Greek army was pushed back, and Smyrna was devastated in a catastrophic fire, marking a tragic end to the campaign. The war ended with the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923, which enforced a population exchange. 1.5 million Greeks were expelled from Turkey, and 500,000 Turks left Greece. It was one of the largest forced migrations in modern history, leaving deep scars on both nations. By the late 1930s, Greece had fallen under the dictatorship of Ioannis Metaxas, but World War II would soon test the nation's resilience. In 1940, Italy, led by Mussolini, invaded Greece expecting an easy victory. But the Greeks, outnumbered and outgunned, launched a heroic defense, pushing the Italians back into Albania. This was one of the first major victories against the Axis powers, inspiring Allied forces. However, in 1941, Nazi Germany invaded, overwhelming Greek defenses. Greece fell under brutal occupation by the Germans, Italians, and Bulgarians, but the Greek people fought back. The Greek resistance launched guerrilla attacks, sabotaging Axis operations. Greek civilians suffered immense hardship, including mass executions and famine. In 1944, Greece was liberated, but at a terrible cost. Over 400,000 Greeks had died during the occupation. The war had devastated Greece, and peace would not come easily. No sooner had World War II ended than Greece plunged into a civil war, 1946 to 1949, between communist rebels, supported by the Soviet Union, and the Greek government, backed by Britain and the United States. The war was brutal, dividing families and leaving the country in ruins. In 1949, the communists were defeated, and Greece became a key ally of the West during the Cold War. During the 1950s and 60s, Greece experienced rapid economic growth, fueled by U.S. aid and tourism, but political instability persisted. In 1967, a military junta seized power, ruling Greece under a dictatorship for 7 years. The regime fell in 1974, leading to the restoration of democracy and the birth of the modern Greek Republic. Since the fall of the dictatorship, Greece has embraced democracy, joined the European Union in 1981, and played a key role in international affairs. The 2004 Athens Olympics marked a return to Greece's historical roots, showcasing its cultural legacy to the world. The financial crisis of 2009 to 2015 hit Greece hard, leading to economic hardship, austerity measures, and mass protests. Greece remains a leading force in maritime trade, tourism, and cultural heritage, continuing to influence global history. Despite its struggles, modern Greece stands as a testament to resilience, survival, and the enduring spirit of a people whose civilization once shaped the world. From ancient Athens to the Byzantine Empire, from Ottoman rule to modern democracy, Greece has endured centuries of change. Its history is one of struggle, rebirth, and perseverance. The land that gave the world philosophy, democracy, and epic poetry has never stopped shaping the course of civilization. Even today, Greek ideas, culture, and traditions continue to inspire people around the globe. Greece's story is far from over. It is a living history, a bridge between the ancient and modern world, reminding us that no matter how much time passes, the Greek spirit is eternal. Greece's history is one of resilience, transformation, and cultural brilliance. From the birthplace of democracy in ancient Athens to the struggles of the modern Greek state, this civilization has survived wars, occupations, revolutions, and crises, only to emerge stronger each time. Greece has never just been a nation, It has been a beacon of human achievement, shaping the way we think, govern, and create. The wisdom of Socrates, the heroism of Leonidas, the ambition of Alexander, and the endurance of the modern Greek people have left an imprint that can still be felt in the world today. But Greece is not just a relic of the past. It is a living, evolving force that continues to shape history. As Greece stepped into the 21st century, it faced both great opportunities and difficult struggles. The early 2000s were marked by optimism. Greece joined the Eurozone in 2001 and hosted the 2004 Athens Olympics, proving to the world that the land of the ancient gods still had a powerful voice in the modern era. However, the global financial crisis of 2008 hit Greece harder than most nations. By 2009, the country was in severe economic turmoil, leading to bailouts, austerity measures, and mass protests. The years that followed saw rising unemployment, political instability, and an uncertain future. Many Greeks, especially the younger generation, left the country in search of better opportunities abroad. Yet, despite these hardships, Greece never collapsed. Tourism remained strong. Greek shipping continued to dominate global trade, and the people never lost their sense of national pride. Like the rest of the world, Greece faced a new and unexpected challenge in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic. The country, like much of Europe, imposed strict lockdowns and travel restrictions to contain the virus. Tourism, a key pillar of the economy, suffered massively, and businesses struggled to survive. But Greece's strong sense of community and resilient healthcare system helped it navigate the crisis. By 2021 and 2022, as the world began to recover, Greece saw a resurgence in tourism. The Greek islands once again became hotspots for travelers, and the economy slowly began to stabilize. In 2023 and beyond, Greece focused on renewable energy, digital transformation, and infrastructure development to modernize its economy. Additionally, Greece took a stronger role in European and international politics, strengthening ties with its allies in the EU and NATO, while also managing regional tensions in the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean. As of 2025, Greece is still evolving, balancing its rich cultural heritage with the demands of the modern world. While challenges remain, the Greek people have proven, time and time again, that they are unbreakable. Why Greece's history matters today. So why does the story of Greece still matter? Because Greece is more than just a country. It is an idea, a philosophy, a testament to the power of human perseverance. The concept of democracy, born in Athens, still defines modern governance. The teachings of Greek philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle continue to shape education and ethics. The heroic tales of Greek mythology still inspire books, films, and art worldwide. The Greek spirit of resilience serves as a reminder that even in the face of hardship, survival is always possible. From the ancient warriors of Sparta to the modern citizens rebuilding their country after crisis, Greece has never surrendered to fate. It has shaped it. As we conclude this journey through the entire history of Greek civilization, one thing is clear: Greece is eternal. Its past is legendary, its present is resilient, and its future is full of possibility. Greece's story is not over. It continues to be written every single day. And as long as its language is spoken, its ideas are taught, and its people carry the fire of their ancestors, the legacy of Hellas will live on forever. The gods may have faded, the empires may have fallen, but Greece itself will never die.